Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of Biopharm Catalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Biopharm Catalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where and when you're joining us from. Welcome once again to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is Tuesday, July 28th, 2026. We are excited to have Sheff on again for our monthly podcast to discuss what's going on in the markets as well as his watch list. Welcome back once again, Sheff. Can't believe we've been doing this for what is it, close to a year plus?
Year plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank goodness for our viewers. We've, continued to grow, and, there's so much to talk about, especially during the summertime when you think that there's going to be lags. But, there might be lags in the IBB and the XBI, but not in individual plays where there's always opportunities. Just gotta do what we do when we get together every month or so, and we try to weed out where the opportunities are.
Absolutely. And just before we jump into everything, just one or two housekeeping, or I should say just general updates from BPC. I think I mentioned this on the last podcast, but for those of you who are, data savvy, and, we've gotten a lot of requests for API access, which we actually now have via Biopharm Catalyst. So if you are part of our Elite Plus yearly subscription, or if you do sign up for that, you will get access to our API for our FDA calendar, our PDUFA calendar, our drug pipeline screener tool, as well as our historical catalysts. We offer a pretty high rate limit. I think it's 100 calls per day. So you're able to stay on top of all that via API. I just wanted to mention that once again, in case folks are interested. So, but yeah, let's jump into what's been going on, Sheff. I mean, we're kind of obviously, end of July here, right? XBI over the last month has been down slightly, not terribly. I think it's like, 2 to 3%, right? Over the last month or so. But as you mentioned, there's obviously always catalysts and individual securities to watch out for, which is one of the things that's great about biotech, right? Is a lot of what is driving this is the catalyst and the science behind some of these companies. So I guess just, any general thoughts in terms of what's been going on in the markets as we're kind of in the middle of the summer before we jump into the catalyst stuff?
Absolutely. We talked at the beginning of the year about how, the FDA has been really a lot more interactive with the companies, particularly with regards to complete response letters. Now you have the FDA, which has, confounded this whole database of what these actual complete response letters look like in their detail. So I think that's been really interesting to see, because we've seen companies that have used those to really navigate in how they're going to work with the FDA moving forward with specific language that's tailored to what exactly needs to be done. And in the past, sometimes the meetings with the FDA were ambiguous and there wasn't a lot of things that got done. We're seeing this week, we're seeing the reintroduction of adcoms,
Yep.
which has been really interesting. So we've got, we you will touch upon it, but I mean, 2 in 1 week, in terms of
Yeah.
notes coming out. Um, Capricor in terms of Duchenne's, um, and then, Replimune.
Yep.
So, you
And
know,
for those who are not familiar, I mean, a lot of our viewers might be, but some people may not be. Adcom is short for advisory committee meetings, and it's something that we track as a catalyst for Biopharm Catalyst. It's on our PDUFA calendar. It's technically not a regulatory event, in the sense that the FDA does not have to follow the sort of the recommendation from the advisory committee, but oftentimes they do, Chef. Right? I don't know the exact statistics around that, but I do know that it is most of the time they do take that recommendation. So it is something that folks really are, like to track as a catalyst, because it's fairly indicative of what's going to happen.
absolutely, absolutely. And so, we've seen, one of the things that we've seen specifically historically with these AdCom notes, they're never positive, because obviously it's not the FDA's job to
Right.
paint the picture for the company in terms of, what essentially is going to happen. It's, why are we here? And oftentimes the reason they're there is to muddle through some of the questions that they have about their product. But I think investors see it differently. They see negative AdCom notes as, oh no, this product isn't perfect. The FDA is going to deny it. And we've seen over the years it can be sometimes 60-40, 70-30, depending on how bad the notes actually are and whether those issues can be addressed in an AdCom meeting. But most of the time they're addressable. But I think recently, like we had Capricor, we have, Farmer Bro, Martin Shkreli,
Yeah.
um, you know, really talking about, um, you know, his thoughts because, when they had their phase 3 study, he thought that the data was not as Capricor presented. And the stock, had this meteoric rise from 7 to 30. And then we saw once the FDA got a hold of the notes that, a lot of the things that he said seemed to be accurate because the FDA shot their notes down, and obviously we saw the market take a significant downturn from that stock. So, there's never a lack of excitement in terms of pharmaceutical and biotech stocks and what exactly is going to occur. We never really know based on notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess with that, I mean, I think let's jump into some of the catalysts and the watch list that you have as we are heading into August here. So, where do you want to start? If you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth, and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.biofarmcatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description.
So I'm going to start with the with results. So what I want to do is go through the results of a few of the plays that we were in and what happened, some of the updates that we've recently had over the last week or two, and then the upcoming catalyst. So we're breaking them out into 3 different areas so that if we were to have talked about a play last month, we're not skimming over the success or the non-success that occurred with that play. So I'll start out with results that we had as of recent. Unicisive, which was a stock that I'd followed for a long time since the beginning of the year. Obviously Shalabh Gupta, his main point was that we just have to get our manufacturing facility, monitored, and we will have approval. Well, obviously, it's a manufacturing facility that's out of the country. They don't have exact control over that, but that was one of the things that we talked about in terms of what to look for. And they ended up getting a complete response letter. So initially, the stock got hit from seven. It went from about $8 down to about 370, and it's quickly recovered. And I think the reason for that is because of the institutional buys, and not necessarily buys, but the institutional holdings within that company because it's such a big marketplace. So they ended up getting a CRL. Um, Folks that were on my feed know that I didn't have a position going in because I was concerned about manufacturing. I actually had to put a small position in right before, but it wasn't the majority position I had. But those are some of the concerns that we see a lot of times with these pharmaceutical companies and biotechs when manufacturing issues are not addressed appropriately. So they got a CRL. They're going to resubmit. At the end of the year, and they'll go through that process all over again. So, wanted to give an update there. Mankind just got approved. Um, and so, there it was the July 26th PDUFA date. It was the supplemental NDA for Furosix, which was a ready flow auto injector. We suspected that it had a little bit of a bump of about 10%. I like the SNDAs because the supplemental NDAs, as we've talked about before, NDA, new drug application. But if it's a supplemental NDA, then they're not refiling all of the information again. They're just looking to add on to what's already approved. So a lot of times we'll see supplemental NDAs run and then get accepted because it is based on an additional application for a drug or device that's already been on the market. So
Yeah.
they got approved on the 26th. And then the one that we had talked about since January when it was 20 cents, and that was Outlook Therapeutics. We know we talked about a lot to do with what the FDA and how they work through the FDA and the type A response, and then the federal dispute resolution with the ombudsman of the FDA. Well, obviously their PDUFA was on the 29th. They got approved. It saw a high of $1.70, $1.75. Prior to that, it had pushed near $2. And obviously, as we talked about in March, it was 20 cents. So it had a really nice rise. It was a good trading stock. Oftentimes, though, once they get approved, a lot of these plays, they can oftentimes retrace quite significantly, specifically when it's approved and people are looking for what's next. So they got this drug, Lentnava, approved in macular degeneration, neovascularization, macular degeneration, and people are saying, now what's the market for them? And so I think that had a lot to do with it. Also, the fact that a lot of times people are concerned that there is going to be reverse splits. And that was one of the things that come up. So it had kind of stifled their move a little bit. The reverse split never occurred because when they got approved, they were $1.40. Now they're 85 cents.
Yeah.
So all that to say, they got approved. We used we talked about the one, the one, the one trial theory.
Yeah.
And so that was significant. And now, there's updates that we're awaiting. And so we're waiting updates, and we just had one yesterday on Goss, and that's Gossamer. And they basically talked about the fact that they have met with the FDA, and the FDA, pretty much told them and gave them a path to submit for their BLA, which is significant. That's their biologic licensing application. So they got Type B minutes from the FDA. FDA submitted this path for them to submit the BLA in September for seralutinib and pulmonary arterial hypertension. So you've got that. You've got the fact that the stockholders approved a reverse split. They approved a conversion, which supported and strengthened their capital structure, which is what they needed because obviously at the time of this data yesterday, the stock was at 14 cents. They have 57 million in cash. And we saw yesterday the stock go from 14 cents to 28 cents in the after hours, got to 30 cents this morning. And then since then, it tumbled down to 20 cents. I think it's retracing. And I think when you look in terms of what the catalyst is a submission of their NDA. And then, obviously the company wants to do a reverse split after that. And so I think it's something to look into in terms of a catalyst. I like it as a catalyst, and I think it gives a significant runway through September. So I like that one. We talked about Capricorn. Capricorn had some data out yesterday that wasn't exactly the best data. It was notes that talked about their product for Duchenne's. And so, they got briefing material documents, and basically the documents in their BLA talked about the fact that the data that they had didn't match up. So we saw significant decrease in the share price. Obviously, their PDUFA is going to be shortly after that. It's going to be in August, I believe, early August, like August 2nd. And so that's definitely a catalyst moving forward, but it's not one that I'm going to mess with because obviously there's notes attached to it, and what they still have to get through the Adcom. And if the Adcom's negative, the majority of the time, significant, like 70% of the time, the Adcom and the decision in the Adcom, the FDA will side with that. And I don't know if you've seen similar as well, John, but a lot of times the Adcom doesn't steer too far away from their committee members.
Yes, absolutely. That is definitely true.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. The other thing, we saw notes come out today on Replimune, and Replimune is one that it closed down 38% today. And they had notes that came out that were negative. And so, they have an oncolytic immunogenic therapy to treat cancer. Obviously, it's in the same space as cure. And so, we'll see what happens. But again, that's one that is going to have their PDUFA in mid-August, and so that's one to watch, and that's Replimune. The FDA basically said today that their mid-stage data was not interpretable, which, obviously that's pretty big. When you look into the weeds, which investors oftentimes don't do, they see something like that, and the stock takes a hit. So we'll see what happens over the next coming days. NRXP, NRXP Pharma has a PDUFA date, which is a generic drug user-free act as opposed to a prescription drug user-free act. And they have their date tomorrow. And so I think that's going to be significant for the company. In March, we talk about manufacturing, how important that is. In March, the company received a letter from the FDA Office of Generic Drugs, which stated that the FDA they have not identified any bioequivalent deficiencies at the time, which in manufacturing is pretty significant. A lot of times you don't get that kind of clarity with the FDA. So, I expect them to get approved. I don't have any shares in the stock. I played the run, but that one is it seems like it's de-risked because they have heard from the FDA. But again, that will be a decision that will be given tomorrow. So stay tuned. That's the last PDUFA decision of July 2026. So moving forward, we've got one that I'm watching, PCSA. It's Processa Pharma, and Processa Pharma. I just had heard word from the CFO that there's news imminent that there's supposedly a reverse merger with a private bio that has real revenues. It wasn't, it's based on a lawsuit that was dropped by a company called Elion, and Elion says that this merger is contingent upon, if there's a reverse merger, it's contingent upon this lawsuit that's been filed. All I know is that today I asked someone that I know closely had gotten a message saying, hi, so and so, there will be an update from Processa before August 7th. The reason that's important is because there's a company called Nextel. It's NXTC. And they had a reverse merger a couple of weeks ago, and it sent the stock up significant, like
Mm.
well over 100%. So Processa Pharma, PCSA, is in the same realm. And so, that's one to just keep an eye on. It's not one that where they've press released that, but if you look in terms of the SEC filings, you see that there's a lot of things dependent upon this merger situation, and the date has to be by August 7th. So just keep that in mind. Processa Pharma, and they deal in the space in breast cancer. They've got a product for breast cancer, which is a capecitabine um, replacement, which
Mhm.
capecitabine is an oral therapy used for breast cancer. Um, 10x Therapeutics. They've got a catalyst upcoming. It's going to be at ASCO, or excuse me, not ASCO, ESCO, the European Society for Clinical Oncology. That data set is between August 28th and the 31st, and so I think that is going to be pretty significant for the company, moving forward. And it's a catalyst that I like the specific time frame around that catalyst. I like that they give it a 28th through the 31st. I believe the data is going to be on a Friday, which is on the 29th. So the stock is trading close to $16 right now. Um, have a lot of cash. They've got about 70 million in cash. They recently got an upgrade from Canaccord. So that's pretty significant. So that's one to keep in mind and keep a watch on. And again, I like the specific time frame of August 28th through the 31st. Um, Speaking of specific time frame, there's a company called IRD. It's Opus Genetics, and Opus Genetics has data called the Best One data. That data has been narrowed down to the second week of September. So that's significant. They provided an update. It's going to include 3-month data from the cohort one of their ongoing open label phase one, phase two data. And that is it's in uh, vitelliform macular dystrophy of the eye, BVMD. So I like that they set up for when that data is going to be. I like that it's open label data, and I like again that it's going to be presented at a major conference
Mhm.
in Vienna. So keep an eye on that one, and that's Opus Genetics. Um, and what I'm doing is I'm working down in terms of beginning of September, because now we're truly in the last month of the third quarter through the end of of September, and then some plays into the early fourth quarter. So the next play is Telix, and Telix has a PDUFA date on September 11th, and so Telix has had a prior CRL, and it's basically it's something that helps determine cancer. It's not a drug, but it's a what is oh it's TLX 101, which is basic. It's an investigational PET-3. It's an agent for the imaging of glioma or brain cancer. So they've been assigned a PDUFA date of September 11th, and again, this is where we go back to what happened with UNCY. They have a CRL. They had a CRL. It was due to identified deficiencies, CMC issues. So again, had it not been for the CRL, they would have gotten, this pushed through the finish line. So unless um, they specifically address that, it will be tough to get it pushed through. They did state, and I put in my notes here, the FDA documented deficiencies that needed to be remediated prior to submitting their BLA. So obviously, the fact that they submitted their BLA and has a PDUFA date, you would think that those issues would have been taken care of already. But again, as an investor, you kind of want to, weigh the pros and cons and focus on what you see in front of you, not necessarily what you anticipate could happen. Um, CNTB, there's data in early September. They don't really give a time frame for that data, but keep that in mind that that data is early September, and it gives us kind of it's trial data. And so that's not necessarily data I'm going to play unless I specifically know, what it is for, or what the date is. And so it's basically, it's top line data from their free Seabreeze stat asthma study, which they basically say early September 2026. They've got a strong cash runway into the second half of 2027. Um, they've got 65, 70 million in cash. And so again, that's a targeted play that people want to look at in terms of time frame. The other one I really like is CNTX. Um, CNTX has CTIM 95 data in pancreatic cancer. It's open label phase 1 data. Um, and the stock right now is near 52-week lows. 52 lows, 55 cents. The stock's been trading at 57, 58 cents. It's highly institutionally owned. And, the data that has come out so far has shown to be really positive in terms of what the company expects moving forward from this. So, um, we'll see what happens. I'm not exactly sure when the specific date is because they didn't give a timely date of when that's going to occur. But I do like that it's open label. I like that um, in earlier studies they've shown that they've been very efficacious and they've been very well tolerated. It's open label, so they can see if the study is progressing and doing well, and patients are benefiting from it. So I really like CNTX. And I do own shares of CNTX. And the prior one, I own shares of CNTB. Um, and I will, probably start to pair off those shares in September without a specific catalyst date.
Mhm.
Um, so the other one that is in the fall that needs to be looked at is Dogwood Therapeutics. Um, they've got they just talked about the fact that they're going to have data in the fall of 26. They finished their enrollment of 200 patients in their ongoing HOW CINP phase 2B trial, which is helps in the in neuropathy. Chemotherapy induced neuropathy is what um, uh, chemotherapy induced neuropathic. Um, oh gosh, it it escapes me. Anyway,
Okay. That's a
um, too many words associated with it, but it's basically it helps in neuropathy, and that data is phase 2B data. That data should be um, finished in the fall of 2006. So again, I mean September. It's kind of a generic date. But it's one to keep an eye on. It's a very low float. The company's around $1.50 a share right now. I know they only have 7 or 8 million shares outstanding, about 4 million shares in the float. So it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Um, BFRI, and I've talked about this one before. Biofrontera, they've got a PDUFA date on September 28th, and they have a supplemental NDA. And again, I've talked about supplemental NDAs. I like those because they've got an existing product right now, and their product has shown that it's been very well tolerated, and so it's one of those PDUFAs that doesn't have a lot of data that they've had to submit, being it that a supplemental NDA. So I like the PDUFA date for September. It's one of the few clean PDUFA dates that is a low priced stock. The stock is right now, I think it closed at $1.10. 52-week low is 60 cents. They've got an extremely low shares outstanding. They've got about 15 million outstanding, about 12 million in float. So again, PDUFAs like that hang around $1, that hang around between 1 and 150, and their supplemental NDAs, oftentimes those plays are going to run because investors are looking at new ways to put their money and new places to put their money, especially in light of Outlook just getting approved, and thinking to themselves, hey, where can I, put some good money to work while I wait for this to get approved. And their drug application is for Amulose. And it's basically topical gel used in combination with their Rololed red light lamp for the treatment of basal cell carcinoma. So this product is going to work with the product that they already have. So it's definitely beneficial for the company to get that pushed through. And I know that they haven't had any issues so far with the FDA in terms of manufacturing because their other product got approved. So, we'll see what happens there. And I like that catalyst date for the 28th of September. Let's look at guts, and that's Fractal Health. And we've talked about Fractal Health in the past. They are going to have upcoming data here in September, and that data is basically it's their longer term reveal study. So they had the remain study, they had the reveal study. The remain study was an open label study, and it basically talked about how those patients do after the patients have been on a GLP-1 and then they're given their treatment from Fractal Health. And that data was released in June. It was extremely positive. That was open label data. The data that's going to be released in early October is pretty much their primary data that they're going to use to pull together their de novo application in late Q4. So in late December, they'll get that, push it through, and then they're going to look for somewhere between 6 to 8 months, before it's approved. And they're looking for that de novo filing at the end of the year. They've got cash runway through early 2027. So at some point they're going to need to raise, but that catalyst is going to be a huge catalyst because, of course, we're dealing in the GLP-1 space, and it's like we know that patients who take GLP-1s do extremely well early on, but there's usually a period after 6 months where they level off, and in many cases, actually, the weight comes back. So what do you do? Where is the opportunity to have add-on therapy that can help? And that's where Fractal Health comes into play. And so again, we saw that stock 3 or 4 months ago in 40 cents. We were talking about it. Now it's near 80. And I think this data is going to be, not I think, but this data is going to be, pivotal data for them moving forward to really jumpstart them to where they need to be. And it's a good trading stock, obviously, with it being in that space that investors can trade around that data, maybe trade up till the end of September, maybe get it to $1.10, which would be 20% gain from where it's at now, and then look to shed. I think from a trader standpoint, it's really important that the catalyst. Like early October is easier to work with than the fall of 2026.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that helps out a lot. ALDX, ALDX has been really frustrating. And the reason ALDX has been frustrating is because they're in the ophthalmic space, just like Outlook Therapeutics. Someone had asked a question on the last presentation that we did in the box and basically said, hey, Sheff had mentioned, the Oppenheimer presentation. Yes, that Oppenheimer presentation for Aldera Therapeutics was on June 3rd, where Tom Brady, or excuse me, not Tom Brady, that's the quarterback for the Patriots, Todd Brady, the CEO for Aldera, who's probably not as rich as Tom Brady, specifically mentioned that he wanted to take the same route that Outlook did, said that he had challenges, just like Outlook had, with the Ophthalmic Advisory Committee, because both Outlook and Aldera had both been through the Ophthalmic Advisory Committee, and both of them said that you don't have sustainable, efficacious, your product isn't, providing, relevant efficacy to get approved. And that's when, obviously Outlook went to the federal dispute resolution, they won their appeal, and then they got approved. Well, the type A meeting with Aldera was the same, but Aldera decided that instead of filing, they would use that as their last resort to file with the ombudsman of the FDA, and they're going to have a type D meeting, which the type D meeting is there's the A, the B, the C, and the D. The D specifically, looks over and clarifies what the FDA minutes said so that the company has a good understanding so that they can resubmit. So that disappointed a lot of investors, and the stock has taken a hit. The stock, prior to that announcement, the stock was trading, around 220. And that's, after Todd Brady had bought, you know, um, you know, about 75,000, no, it was 250,000 shares that he bought at $1.67. And we saw that stock price go up to 250 or 225 as a result of that. And obviously it's come down. So, is that a catalyst to trade around? I don't really think so. I don't think so. I think that if they were meeting with the FDA from a federal dispute resolution and the ombudsman, that would be an appropriate catalyst to trade around, because that would influence and speed up the process like it did for Outlook. It took that meeting that occurred in June, and then next thing you know, in a month,
Yeah. Yeah.
they had a PDUFA. Whereas this, they're talking about resubmitting all over again, which would be kind of messy. Um, Let's look at KTTA. Um, KTTA, I really like Katera. Uh, KTTA has it's Pasithea. KTTA. They have data on October 23rd at ESMO Congress. Um, and basically, they're going to be presenting phase 1 dose escalation study. They're going to be talking about safety and pharmacokinetics of their lead candidate, PAS-004. And it's a MEK inhibitor for the treatment of MAPK pathways in patients with advanced solid tumors. So those are new, and they work extremely well. And we're seeing early on positive data, that's proving that. But one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind with Pasithea is the stock's 43 cents, and they did an investor. It was a private announcement where they had a bunch of institutions like Stonehill Capital, Orbimed. They had all this money come in December. Obviously, that took the stock on a rise, to 140, and that was in December. Since then, the stock's come back down. But this is the first the opportunity to present clear data on their MEK inhibitor, and I think it gives it the potential for a solid run-up catalyst. 52-week low, again, is 28 cents. The company has 50 million in cash. They've got, they've got a book value per share of $2. It's just extremely strong. They don't have any debt. And so I like their financial position, but I also like the fact that they're going in a space that uh, allows significant growth.
Yeah.
And I've talked with, and looked at analyst reports, and they think that it's a really promising company. So I think where it's at now at 45 cents, and a significantly low market cap,
Yeah.
that's one. It's 70% institutionally owned. So I think that's
That's high.
really important. Yeah, very high for a 50-cent stock. And then we got two more that are PDUFA plays that I think are further out, but because they're further out, I think they give the opportunity to really appreciate. And you know, this being let's see, Inovio, ticker symbol INO. The stock is right under $1. It's today it hit its 52-week low. But here's the thing that's really important. The company is waiting on a meeting from the FDA because they work in a unique space. They've got their drug 3107. It's for recurrent respiratory papillomatosis, so RRP. There's already a drug for that that was just approved at the end of 2025. And recently they just got orphan drug designation, which is 7 years of exclusivity. So, investors are saying if they got 7 years of exclusivity, does that preclude them from getting approved? Well, no, it doesn't, because one of the things that I know, and they're saying with this product is that their 3107 works in patients that might not work in the product Papamezos that got approved. And so there's patients who, even though they're on that approved therapy, might still have recurrence, and they work differently. And so their meeting with the FDA is going to allow them to talk with the FDA and really clearly differentiate what needs to be done on a regulatory front in terms of, the path that they need to take to get approved. So all of that's supposed to happen between August and their date of, October 30th, where they have their PDUFA date. And I think, again, it's right at the 52-week low. I think it's a good entry point, and I really like that stock here at this level. And then the final one, another PDUFA play, and I like this one because it's a supplemental NDA, is BTAI. And that one is, let's see, that one is called it's BioExcel is what it's called, therapeutics. And so they've already got an at-home device, basically they're having, you know, well, they have a device that works, but then they're having it at home. They want an at-home device. And so it's basically, the PDUFA date is November 14th. If again, their 52-week low is 75 cents. They got 12 million in cash, no debt. And I really like the stock here at this level at 84 cents. It's a November 14th PDUFA play, so it definitely gives time to get back where it was. I think that the high is, around $10. And obviously the low is where it's at now. It's 84 cents, but I think the 52-week low is actually 73 cents. So, that's where we are, with a lot of these plays. And I think, really the key as we move into the fall, and I want to just stress upon investors that a lot of times with the September is this third quarter, early fourth quarter is not the best time for biotech. So I think it's really important to be selective,
Yeah.
especially as, there's other events that are occurring, that we have no control over, worldly events that can sometimes affect local biotech and
Yeah.
pharma companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to remember as we, like you said, as we kind of head into these later months in the year. But and we do have obviously some conferences coming up, but even with that, you have to be selective, right, with what you're taking a look at. So, um,
You definitely do.
um, I also just wanted to mention, Chef has mentioned a couple of times about the SNDA, the supplemental NDA. That is something that we track on our site as well. It's listed. We have them broken out. Obviously, one is NDA, and then we actually have like a phase for SNDA. It's called SNDA on the site. So if you're looking for that specifically, that's how you would filter for it. So just wanted to mention that. But that was awesome, Chef, as usual. Really appreciate the time, and all of your insights as usual as we get into the later months here. For everyone on the call, Chef, I think answered one of the questions from one of the commenters on our site from the last time. So if you have questions, we do take note of them and we try to answer them on the next episode, or we'll answer them right in the comments, depending on how timely they are. So please feel free to like and subscribe and comment on our videos. We really appreciate it. We love the growth that we've seen. We've got a lot of subscribers on the site now, and a lot of people are finding this information useful and relevant. So really appreciate all you guys. And Chef, really appreciate you as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely. Appreciate all the questions from everyone. Again, like John said, we're here to serve. We want to make sure that we're answering all those questions, and we'll get back in a timely fashion as possible.
Yep. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next month. Take care.